If you're listening to this while folding laundry, washing dishes, or just sitting in that quiet moment between chores, then maybe you felt it too. That slow ache. The moment you realize you're not angry, you're just invisible. Not because of what you did wrong, but because of how long you've been there. So long that no one sees you anymore. My name is Dorothy Ann Whitmore. I'm 70 years old. And last Christmas, my son told me I'd done enough and that they'd handle things without me. He said it like a favor, like I'd been carrying too much for too long. But I knew what he really meant. Step aside. You're no longer needed. This isn't a revenge story, but if you've ever been erased by the very people you built your life around, then stay. Because this is the story of how I stopped being just thee. I've always been the planner. The kind of mother who had wrapping paper sorted by season and casseroles labeled in the freezer with dates written in Sharpie. Every Christmas, I made things feel magical quietly, efficiently, without asking for help. I never minded being in the background. In fact, I thought that was love, to be the one who shows up without being asked, to notice the little things no one else had time to notice. When my husband passed, our son, Caleb, was only 27. He was married to Lindsay, fresh out of business school, and already talking about redefining family traditions. I didn't mind. I thought, let them build their life. I'll be the support beams. In the years that followed, I became the person who just handled things. When their fridge broke down the week of Thanksgiving, I had a new one delivered within 24 hours, paid in full. When Lindsay needed to go back to work after having Ella, their daughter, I offered to pay half the nanny costs for the first year, no strings attached. I don't say this to brag. I say it because no one ever asked me to do it, and no one ever told me to stop. There was no thank you note, no framed photo on the mantle with "World's Best Grandma" etched in silver. And yet, I kept going, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give quietly. My old career was accounting. I knew how to stretch a budget, split a bill, hide a surprise gift in a line item so it wouldn't show up on the statements. Numbers were my language. Love was the spreadsheets. I never showed anyone. Over 12 years, I gave over 140,000 to Caleb and his family. I never once wrote it down, never once added it up. Not until the silence started to feel louder than the words they weren't saying. When Christmas came around, I'd always arrive early, usually the day before. I'd help with the tree, bake Ella's favorite sugar cookies, bring a new board game, and the turkey, always done my way, slow roasted, seasoned with rosemary and orange peel. No one ever asked me to make it, but if I didn't, no one else would. That was my role. The mother, the grandma, the safety net. I didn't mind being needed until the day they told me I wasn't last December. I arrived at Casa Lila, our usual brunch spot. It's this Italian place tucked near the old stone library, red brick, ivy-covered windows, soft jazz playing under the clink of teacups. We'd gone there every holiday season for nearly a decade. I wore my softest gray coat, the one Ella once called Grandma's blanket you can wear. I even brought a tin of oatmeal cookies I'd baked that morning, wrapped in wax paper. I still remember thinking, this will make her smile. Caleb and Lindsay arrived 10 minutes late. Ella was with them, staring at her iPad, earbuds in. No one reached for the cookies. After we ordered, nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, Caleb set his napkin down and looked at me. He smiled in that careful, polite way, like he was bracing to say something prepared in advance. "Mom," he said, "Lindsay and I were talking, and we really appreciate everything you've done all these years." He reached for his water glass, paused, then added, "But we think it's time you let us handle the holidays ourselves this year." I blinked. That was all. No angry tone, no raised voices. Just, "You've done enough." He said it like he was giving me rest, like he was granting me permission to disappear. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just folded my napkin, set it neatly beside the untouched cookies, and nodded once. Not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. In that moment, I realized something I had never dared to admit to myself. I had never been invited. Not once. I had just always shown up, always filled in the cracks, always assumed that if I gave enough, they'd still need me. Turns out, people don't stop needing things. They just stop seeing the one who provides them. That day, I walked home slower than usual. The air was sharp. Even the Christmas lights looked cold. I passed a little girl holding her dad's hand. She was laughing, pointing at the bakery window where gingerbread men stood in rows. He smiled at her like nothing else in the world mattered. And for a moment, I wondered, had I ever been smiled at like that? Or had I only been thanked in actions, in assumptions? In silence, I reached the apartment, turned the key, and stepped into the stillness. The cookies were still warm, but no one would eat them. I placed the tin on the table, sat down, and just stared at it. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just not invited. I had been gently, permanently moved aside, and for the first time in 70 years. I wasn't sure who I was if I wasn't the one who showed up. I didn't tell anyone what Caleb said at brunch. Not my sister. Not the women from the quilting group I stopped attending last spring. Not even my neighbor, Mrs. Flynn, who always asks too many questions and means well but never waits for the answer. Some stories don't come out in words. They settle in the body instead. Like a dull ache behind the ribs, like that pause before you unlock your front door, hoping someone might be inside, even though you know they're not. That's what it felt like walking home that day. Not heartbreak, not even rejection, just airless. Like something I'd been holding up for decades had finally slipped, and no one noticed it fall. I spent the rest of that Sunday folding things, laundry, grocery receipts. The corner of the throw blanket, I never quite get to lie flat on the couch. Anything to avoid thinking too long. But the silence in the apartment made everything louder. When I went to put the cookies away, the same oatmeal cookies Caleb used to sneak from the tin when he was 7, I noticed the corner of the wax paper had curled. The cookies were still soft, still warm, but untouched. I stared at them for a long time. That's when something strange settled in me. Not anger, not bitterness, but a single, quiet question. What if they've only ever seen me as the backup plan? That night, I couldn't sleep. The bedroom window rattled slightly in the wind. A string of holiday lights flickered outside someone's balcony across the street. They blinked like a slow apology. I got up, walked to the desk in the corner, and pulled open my old accounting binder, the one I hadn't touched since retiring 9 years ago. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop, and I started typing. Internet bills, 80 month hours for 4 years, because they once asked me to keep it in my name. Mom, so it doesn't get shut off, $3, 840. Lindsay's car, down payment, $6,000. College help, $48,000 over 6 semesters. Nanny support, $9,600 total for 1 year. Emergency plumbing, $1,900 when their basement flooded. Gifts, groceries, surprise help, winter coats for Ella, a new couch when they moved. Line by line, it added up. I didn't even realize I'd crossed 6 figures until I reached $143,220. I stared at that number, not because I wanted it back, not because I regretted it, but because I had never even thought to count it. You know, sometimes I wonder if anyone listening has done the same thing, kept giving quietly for years, and only realized how much when there was nothing left to give. If you have, I want you to know, it's not petty to remember. It's not selfish to add it up. Sometimes, it's the only way to see yourself again. The next morning, I made 2 calls. One to the bank. I'd like to cancel all recurring transfers. The other to my lawyer. I want to review my authorizations and estate plan. I said it calmly, like I was finally balancing an old ledger no one else cared to check. Afterward, I made myself peppermint tea. It used to be Caleb's favorite. He'd ask for it whenever he had a cold. I remember him once whispering, "Don't tell Dad I like the mint kind. It's too girly." He was 6. That day, I drank the whole cup alone. Didn't even blink. On Tuesday, I walked past the bookstore on Maple and Pine. The display window was decked out in faux snow, tiny lanterns, and a winter reads for young minds sign. Inside, A little girl sat on a beanbag chair reading aloud to a stuffed owl. It made me smile in a way I hadn't in weeks. Evelyn, the store owner, spotted me. She's in her 60s. Warm eyes. Always wears scarves that look hand-woven. She waved me in. "You have that look," she said. "What look?" "The one that says, I have more stories to tell than anyone's ready to hear." I didn't know what to say, so I laughed. That's when she asked, "Want to volunteer to read to the kids this Saturday? We do story hour. Cozy corner. Hot cocoa. Zero judgment." I opened my mouth to say no, but something in me hesitated, something that hadn't stirred in a long time. I nodded. Just once, that night. I didn't check my phone. I didn't peek at Caleb's messages. Didn't scroll to see if Lindsay posted any pictures. I didn't need to. I was starting to understand something. They hadn't pushed me away to be cruel. They had simply gotten used to me always being there. So much so that they stopped wondering what would happen if I wasn't. The phrase "you've done enough" wasn't meant to hurt, but it did, because behind those words wasn't gratitude. It was erasure. I wasn't being retired. I was being deleted. They weren't cutting back on traditions. They were trimming out the part that included me. But maybe, just maybe, that opened a space, not for me to beg to return, but for me to ask, what do I want this season? Who do I get to be when I'm no longer the one making things happen in silence? The peppermint tea had gone cold. I reheated it and drank every last drop. This time, it tasted like something new, not a memory, but maybe a beginning. I used to believe there were two kinds of invitations. The ones you get in the mail, stamped, addressed, planned, and the ones that go without saying, the kind you earn by showing up year after year. Turns out, there's a third kind. The ones you imagine were sent, but never actually were. That Thursday, I pulled down my Christmas box from the hall closet, same one I've kept for 15 years. It's old, taped at the corners, smells faintly like cinnamon and dry pine. Every December, I open it like clockwork, even when I wasn't sure if I'd be spending the holidays alone. Even when no one confirmed plans, I still opened it. Still laid out the silver ribbons. Still untangled the string lights that only half worked. Not out of habit, but hoped. This year, the hope felt quieter. Not gone, just more fragile. I unwrapped each ornament like I always did. Slowly, carefully, as if they might remember who once held them. A hand-painted angel. A glitter-covered pine cone Ella made in preschool. A tiny ceramic house I bought the year Caleb and Lindsay moved out. I placed them on the table, but didn't decorate. It felt strange, decorating a place no one was coming to. There's a difference between being alone and being unseen. That morning, I realized I hadn't been invited to Christmas in over a decade. Not officially, not even casually. No one ever said, "We'd love to have you." No one asked what dish I wanted to bring. I just showed up because I thought that's what mothers do. But now, after Caleb's words at brunch, "You've done enough," I started to wonder, had I ever truly been welcomed? Or had I just been tolerated? I sat with that thought longer than I expected. Long enough that the sun shifted on the hardwood floor, tracing long shadows across the coffee table. Long enough for the tea to go cold again. That afternoon, I opened my drawer and pulled out every Christmas card from the past 10 years. None of them were addressed to Mom or Grandma, just Dorothy. No notes inside, just pre-printed messages. And Caleb's quick signature. No one added a line that said, "Can't wait to see you." Not even once. I stepped out for air around 4, walked past the bakery, down Maple, past the florist where they always keep the poinsettias lined in rows this time of year. The red petals used to make me feel festive. This time, they looked like warnings, like something too bright for how I felt. I stopped in front of a small thrift store I'd passed 1,000 times. Inside, an old woman browsed alone. She had silver hair tied in a bun and wore a coat 2 sizes too big. She reminded me of someone, maybe me. It's strange how, when you stop moving for everyone else, the world gets quieter. Like it's waiting to see if you'll finally hear yourself think. And what I heard, sitting in the stillness of my kitchen, surrounded by ornaments no one would see, was this. You never needed their invitation. You were already there, and they still forgot to say you mattered. That night, I looked over the spreadsheet again, the one with all the money I'd quietly given over the years. The meals cooked, gifts wrapped, bills covered, emergencies smoothed over, all without being asked, all without being thanked. The number still read 140, 220, but the truth it held felt heavier. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they'd come to expect it. Like air, like light, like me. And once they didn't need it anymore, they dimmed the switch. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from yelling or slammed doors. It comes from absence, from the chair no one saves you at the table, from the sentence that never arrives. We can't do this without you. That night, I wrote in my notebook for the first time in months. I wrote, "This year, I'll bring nothing and see who still wants me there." Not bitter, not in protest, just to know. The next morning, I walked past the community center where they host winter coat drives. There were volunteers setting up tables, placing thermoses of cocoa and boxes of donated scarves in rows. A girl around Ella's age waved at me. She had mismatched gloves and cheeks pink from the cold. She held up a sign, hot drinks, warm company, free for all. It was the first real invitation I'd seen in years. I went inside. I didn't know anyone, but no one asked who I was. They just handed me a cup of cider and said, "There's room at the table." And for once, I didn't feel like I had to earn my seat. When I returned home, I passed by my mailbox. There was one card inside, from a neighbor. No glitter, no pre-written holiday verse, just a handwritten note. "Thanks for always holding the elevator when I had my hands full. You've made this building warmer than you know. Happy holidays. Dorothy." I stared at it for a long time, not because of the words, but because someone noticed. Not for the gifts I gave, not for what I paid, but for a kindness that had no receipt, no dramatic scene, no holiday meltdown. Just a woman sitting in a quiet apartment, realizing that sometimes the loudest erasure is the one that never makes a sound. And sometimes the most powerful act isn't fighting to be included. It's choosing to stay home and learning to love the quiet you once feared. It happened quietly. No fireworks. No life-altering announcement. Just a thought, small, almost shy, that slipped in while I was making tea one afternoon. What if I stopped giving? Not forever. Not out of bitterness. Just to see what would happen if I chose to keep something for myself. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't a lesson. It was curiosity. And after 70 years of being the giver, the helper, the one who never asked for anything. Curiosity felt like a dangerous kind of freedom. I spent most of my life thinking if I gave enough time, money, energy, presence, then I'd be remembered, included, needed. But when you're the one always filling the gaps, people stop noticing the gaps ever existed. They stop noticing you. I stood at my kitchen window that morning, staring out at the parking lot dusted in snow, thinking of all the winters I had bent around other people's comfort. The turkeys roasted without onions because Lindsay was allergic. The gifts wrapped in quiet tones because bright paper makes Caleb anxious. The early arrivals to help set the table, and the late departures to help clean it. None of it ever made the photos, but I was always there, in the background. The one making sure the background existed. That week, I made 3 small changes. The first, I started cooking meals for one, no leftovers. No frozen just in case Caleb stops by containers. Just warm, simple food that I liked. The second, I added a new line to my budget. For me, monthly. It wasn't much. $100, but it was the first line I'd ever written that had my name in the to column. And the third, I joined the local story hour at the bookstore, Saturday mornings. Just me and a group of wiggly kids in fleece pajamas, sitting around a crooked Christmas tree with paper ornaments. I read slowly, not like a performance, but like I was telling something sacred. And for once, I wasn't doing it for family. I wasn't being grandma. I was just Dorothy. The first story I read was about an old woman who lived in a red cabin at the edge of a snowy wood. She had once had a big family. but they stopped visiting. So she started telling stories to the wind and the squirrels and eventually to any child who wandered near enough to hear. When I finished, one of the girls, a little thing with a missing front tooth and wild curls, looked up at me and whispered, "Do you live in a cabin too?" I smiled. "No, sweetie, I live in an apartment." Then I paused. But I think I'm learning how to make it feel like mine again. That evening, I came home to a voicemail from Caleb. "Hey, Mom, just wondering if you were planning to come by next week. You've been kind of quiet lately." There was a pause, a sound like Lindsay whispering in the background. Then he added, "Anyway, let us know if you're dropping off gifts this year. Ella keeps asking." I didn't call back, not because I was angry, but because for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to respond. I spent that night reorganizing my hallway closet. It sounds boring, but something about it felt symbolic. I pulled out boxes I hadn't opened in years, old clothes, decorations, things I kept because someone else might need them someday. And then, at the very back, behind a faded tablecloth, I found it. A small box labeled "For Me." I had no memory of writing it. But there it was. Inside, a pair of red mittens. Still new. Still with the tag. A handwritten note from myself. Folded small. "You said you'd wear these when you finally let yourself enjoy winter again." I sat on the floor and cried. Not because it was sad, but because I'd forgotten I ever gave myself permission to want something. Sometimes, the most radical thing an older woman can do isn't fight. It's pause. It's withhold. It's choose. Choose what to give. Choose when. And most of all, choose herself. A few days later, Evelyn from the bookstore handed me a business card. She smiled and said, "If you'd ever want to do this regularly, I'd be honored to put your name up as our storyteller in residence." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt unreal. I'd spent my life writing everyone else's schedules, Caleb's sports, Lindsay's checkups, Ella's ballet recitals, but never once had anyone offered to write me in until now. I slipped the card into my coat pocket. No promises. Just knowing it was there made me feel seen. Later that evening, as snow started to fall again, I stood in my living room with the tree lights dimmed low. I held the red mittens in my hands, soft, still untouched. And I thought, I wonder what else I've set aside for later that I was actually meant to enjoy now. There's a strange power in realizing you can say no, even to your own patterns, even to your own giving. I didn't decorate the tree that year, but I did hang one small ornament on the doorknob, a little ceramic bell. No name, no year, just a reminder. I exist, even when no one asks me to. And in the quiet, I heard it. Not a knock, not a voice, but my own breathing, calm, steady, present. Maybe, for the first time, I was giving myself the only thing I never had the courage to offer before. A life where I didn't have to be necessary to be valuable. The first Saturday after Christmas was silent, not heavy silent, not sad silent, just still. There were no gift bags to fold up, no pie tins to scrape clean, no pine needles to vacuum from under someone else's tree. And yet, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I wasn't left out. I'd simply stepped aside, on purpose. I woke up later than usual, didn't rush to get dressed, didn't put on earrings or check my phone to see if anyone had messaged. I let the kettle whistle too long, stood at the window, watching a blue jay hop from branch to branch in the frozen maple outside. And as I drank my tea, I thought, this is mine, not borrowed time, not time between errands, just mine. The bookstore felt warmer that morning. Maybe it was the kids in their fuzzy slippers. Maybe it was the cinnamon sticks Evelyn had tucked into the cocoa tray. Or maybe it was me, less tense, less ready to prove I belonged. When I arrived, they cheered. Not because I brought gifts, not because I solved a crisis, just because they remembered the way I read. Soft, slow, like I was telling something only they were meant to hear. I read them a story about a snow fox who couldn't find its way home. It kept circling the same trees, passing the same cold stream, until finally It stopped chasing warmth and made a home in the quiet. When I closed the book, one boy raised his hand. Did the fox ever see his family again? I paused. Maybe, I said, but by then, he didn't need them to know who he was anymore. That afternoon, Evelyn asked if I'd like to stay for tea. We sat by the window, watching the snow pile up in lazy folds on the sidewalk. You know, she said, you don't read like someone who's performing. I'm not. I smiled. I'm just talking to myself out loud. With an audience, she laughed. Then she handed me something, a wooden nameplate with engraved letters, Dorothy Ann Whitmore, storyteller in residence. I held it like a photograph, like a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. You don't have to hang it, she said gently. But I wanted to, not to be seen, but to mark that somewhere in this town someone knew who I was without attaching me to anyone else, not Caleb's mother, not Ella's grandma, just Dorothy, back home. I cleared a spot on the shelf beside my recipe books. I placed the nameplate there, next to an old copy of Little Women and a lavender candle I'd never lit. And I realized I had room for things now, not just physical space, but space inside me. All those years I'd spent storing memories, fixing traditions, holding pieces together. I hadn't noticed how little I'd saved for myself. That night, I sat at the small kitchen table and lit the candle. It flickered against the window pane, casting soft shadows across the walls. I made 1 cup of hot cocoa, just one. No second mug waiting. No tray set aside in case someone drops by. And I wrote a sentence in my notebook. I exist even when I'm not filling a role. You wouldn't think a sentence like that could make your chest tighten. But when you've lived your whole life being something to someone else, mother, wife, planner, backup babysitter, check writer, peacekeeper, learning how to be just, you can feel like stepping into a room with no furniture, unfamiliar, empty, but full of possibility. On New Year's Eve, I didn't go anywhere. I watched the ball drop from my apartment, wore my soft robe, ate buttered toast, and drank sparkling water with frozen cranberries because it felt fancy. No one called. And that was okay, because this time, I wasn't waiting. The next morning, I walked to the community garden near the back of the senior center. It was frozen, of course, but I stood near the plot where I used to plant tomatoes, touched the fence rail, breathed in the sharp winter air. It reminded me of summers when I used to bring Ella here to water the herbs and chase squirrels. She hasn't asked to come in years, but that memory didn't sting today. It just rested. On the way back, I passed a woman sitting on a bench with 2 canvas grocery bags at her feet. She looked tired. Her scarf had come undone, and she was staring at the street like she didn't quite remember why she'd come out in the first place. I sat next to her without asking. We didn't speak for a while. Then I said softly, "Cold morning." She nodded. But better than being in a house where you feel unnecessary, I looked at her. She didn't cry, didn't explain. She didn't have to. I simply nodded. Yeah, I know what you mean. We sat a while longer. Then I stood, gently looped her scarf back around her neck. She smiled without looking at me and said, "Thanks for seeing me." And I thought, that's all most of us want, isn't it? Not a parade, not applause, just to be seen even when we're not being useful. That evening, I wrote another sentence in my notebook. Today, I saw someone without asking for her name, and I was seen back. It didn't feel like much, but for someone who once believed she only mattered when she was doing something, it felt like everything. I didn't send a single text. Didn't ask about dinner plans. Didn't check if they were making my stuffing recipe. This year, I didn't go. Not out of anger, not to make a point, but because for once in my life, I needed to see what would happen if I didn't show up. Would they notice? Would it matter? The morning of Christmas Eve, I made tea. I wore the red mittens I found in the For Me box, still soft, still unworn until this winter. I read a book, a full chapter, uninterrupted. I baked a batch of molasses cookies because I wanted to smell something warm in the house. I tied them with string and left them on my neighbor's doormat. No name, no card, just kindness, the quiet kind. That evening, snow began to fall. Not a blizzard, just soft flakes. drifting like breath over the rooftops, the kind of snow that makes the world hush. I sat by the window, candle lit, a warm blanket pulled over my knees. There was a time, not long ago, when this kind of quiet would have crushed me. Now, it felt like peace. Just after noon on Christmas Day, there was a knock. I didn't rush to answer. I set down my tea, folded the blanket slowly, and opened the door just enough to let the light spill out. Caleb stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, a red scarf looped awkwardly around his neck, too thin for the cold. Behind him, Lindsay, holding Ella's hand, and Ella, holding something round and green with bits of silver, homemade. Clearly, a wreath, crooked, beautiful. No one spoke right away. I didn't ask, "Why are you here?" And they didn't say, "We were wrong." Instead, Caleb cleared his throat and said, "We brought cookies. The ginger kind. You used to love those." I opened the door wider, stepped aside. "There's tea. If you want some." They came in carefully. No one filled the silence with fake smiles or forced chatter. They just looked around. Ella glanced at the small tabletop tree I'd set up. No ornaments, just 3 pine cones and a ribbon. "It's simple," she said. "I like it that way," I replied. Lindsay placed the tin on the counter. Caleb sat near the window, fingers tapping his knee. He looked up at me and asked quietly, "You okay?" "Mom," I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." He stared at the floor. "It felt weird this year, without you there. We didn't make the pie right." Ella cried when she opened the gift, and there wasn't a card in your handwriting. Ella's voice was soft. "I made you this." She held out the wreath. It was bent, a little lopsided, with 2 silver stars taped on like an afterthought. I took it in both hands. "It's lovely," I said. And it was. Not because it was perfect, but because she had made it without being asked. I hung it on the coat hook by the door. No speech, no performance, just that. Lindsay came to stand beside me. "We didn't realize. You've always just handled everything. We thought maybe you'd enjoy the rest." I looked at her, not cold, not cruel, just long enough to say without words, "You don't retire, love. You don't lay off your mother like a staff member." But instead, I said simply, "I don't need to be needed anymore. I just need to be welcomed." Caleb looked up. "Are you coming back next year?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured another cup of tea, set it on the table beside the cookies, sat down, hands wrapped around my own mug. Let's see who reaches out next December, and let's see if I want to answer. They didn't argue, didn't push. Sometimes silence is an answer. They stayed about 20 minutes. Ella looked through my bookshelf. Lindsay fixed the curtain that always slips from the rod. Caleb walked to the window and stood there for a long time. Then, before they left, he said something I'll never forget. "It's quieter without you. Not peaceful, just empty." And I thought maybe now you understand the difference. When the door closed behind them, I didn't cry. I sat down, lifted the wreath from the hook, hung it on the inside of my apartment door. Just for me, to remember that someone had tried. That night, I opened my notebook again, wrote only one line. This year, I didn't go. And they came, not to apologize, not to beg, just to be near. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that when you step away, not in anger, but in dignity, sometimes people finally see the shape of what you've always been. If you're still here, listening from your own quiet room. Maybe you've lived a version of this story too. Maybe you folded your own napkin and stepped back from a table where no one made room for you. If you have, I want you to know you don't have to disappear to be free. You don't have to be bitter to stop giving. And you don't have to be needed to still be worthy. You are still here, and that means something.